This video is part of our course on Pyside6 for Widgets, which is on Udemy. The course goes from the absolute beginning, showing you how you can take advantage of QWidgets using the Python API under the Pyside6 or Qt for Python umbrella. And it covers things you really need on a daily basis: signals and slots, a bunch of widgets you can use. We show you how to use Qt Designer. At the end, we also show you how to work with networks and the model view architecture. If you are interested, be sure to check the link in the description below. In this lecture, we are exploring the QWidget component we have in the Qt framework. And this is a fundamental component in building user interfaces, in that it is going to give you a base window on top of which you can do all other things. So for example, if we set up a QWidget component and show it, we will have a bare window. And on top of this window, we can really build any kind of structure to have all kinds of crazy user interfaces we might wish for in our Qt applications. And to use this, it's really simple. Now you have the fundamentals of how you do things in Qt for Python. Here, I am going to show you a simple example. And this is a class that is going to be living in its own file. The class name is RockWidget. It is going to be inheriting from QWidget. And QWidget is really the base class that we can use in our Qt applications. It is going to have a constructor, and in the constructor, we're going to be doing our basic work here. Another thing I am going to show you in this lecture is how we can use layouts to lay things out nicely. This is really not the place to introduce layouts, but we really need them to have the flexibility to lay things out flexibly inside our widgets. So that's why I am doing that here. You also see that we are having a bunch of components. We have a bunch of buttons. We are doing connections to slots, and we want to respond when these buttons are clicked. And in our code, we will also set up these methods that are going to respond. Once we have the widget, we are going to display it in our main Python file. And here you see that we are doing the usual. We are importing the file that contains our RockWidget class. And we are setting up a widget, which is an instance of our RockWidget component. We are showing it and kicking off the event loop to have our application show up. Now that you know these things, we are going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us step by step. Okay, here we are in our Visual Studio Code editor. I have an empty folder, which is going to be containing the source code for our example here. Let's drag it and drop it on top of Visual Studio Code to open it, and I can create my main Python file. And in here, we can do the usual. We can import the things we need. We can also import sys, set up our application object, and we are going to say window equals QWidget. We are going to show the window, and we are going to say app exec. Okay, to start our application here. Notice that we say Windows here, and we don't have QWidget imported, and we can import that here, QWidget. It is part of the widgets module in Pyside6. And if we do this and run the application, we should see a widget pop up. Let's show our terminal so that we can run the application easily. And we can go up until we find the command to run this. And you see, this is going to pop up our widget. Nothing special here. What we are going to do is to move the logic to set up the widget inside a separate class and have that widget as a base on top of which we can build other things. So let's do that. We are going to create another file. We are going to call it RockWidget. And in that file, we are going to import QWidget from Pyside QWidget. So let's do QWidget. And we'll set up our class. The class is going to be named RockWidget. It is going to be inheriting from QWidget. And it is going to have a constructor. So let's make sure we put that in. And for example, we can give it a window title. Let's say self set window title, and we are going to call this RockWidget. And now that we have this, notice that we did just the minimum we needed to have this be a valid Python class here. So we can come back to main.py and import. We're going to say from RockWidget import rock widget, and we want to create a QWidget component. This time we will create a rock widget. We can do something like this. Now that we have this, we can run. Let's see if this actually works. And if we run, we should see the same thing we saw before. But now this is not an instance of QWidget. It is an instance of rock widget, which itself inherits from the QWidget class. Now that we have this, we can start doing all kinds of crazy things on top of this QWidget component. What can we do? For example, we can set up a bunch of buttons. Let's do that. We will also import QPushButton. Okay, we already know QPushButton. Let's say button 1 equals QPushButton and say button 1. We can do this. If I can type. What are we going to see when we run this application? Let's try to run it. We are instantiating an object of rock widget in main.py, remember? And we want to see where this button is going to show up in our user interface. That's a question you might have. Let's try to run. And if we do this, you see that we don't see our button, but we set it up in our code. The reason this is happening is that this widget doesn't know where to put the button. And to put things inside our widgets or our window, we need to use layout. And the layout is a way. Let's try to draw this so that it is really easy to understand. Now we have our widget component and we put our button in our code here to attempt to put some kind of button in our user interface. But this widget component doesn't know how to lay them out. There is a way in Qt you can tell a widget to lay things out either vertically, okay, something like this, or horizontally from left to right. And you do that using layout. Let's start with a horizontal layout to start out. We have a class which is called QHBoxLayout, and it is a way we have to lay things out horizontally in our class. And to do that, you set up an object of that class. We are going to say layout or button layout. Okay, we can do something like this, and it is going to be a QHBoxLayout component. Okay, once we have the layout, we can add things to this layout. So let's say button layout, add widget. And you see we have a bunch of methods. You can add other layouts inside this layout. You can add a child widget. But in this case, we are just interested in adding a widget, which is going to be our button 1. So please make sure you really understand the flow of things here. We have our parent widget, and we want to put things inside this widget using this layout here. Once we have our widget in the layout, now we can call the setLayout method on the widget to let it use this layout component to lay things out inside the widget component here. So we're going to say self set layout, and we are going to say button layout. We can do this. Now if we run, we should see our button inside our widget. And if we do this, you see that we have button 1 here, and this is really cool. Now that we have this infrastructure in place, we can add other buttons. So for example, we can go down and copy this. I think we can do that. Control Alt down. This is going to copy this in Visual Studio Code, and we can name this to button 2. Okay, and we can add a widget. Again, Control Alt down. This is going to copy the line, and we can say button 2 here. And now we can go down and try to run. We should have 2 buttons, button 1 and button 2, and you can keep going, putting in as many buttons as you want. Another thing I want you to see is that you can lay things out even vertically. So we can change this to be a vertical layout. Let's do that. QVBoxLayout. And we can change this to be a QVBoxLayout. This is all we need to do. And because this is a vertical layout, now when we add these buttons here, they are going to be added in vertical order. Let's try to run. Button 1 should be on top. Button 2 should be below. Let's run again. And we have this here, and this is really cool. Now you can see that we can use this widget, and this is really the idea I was trying to convey here, as a base on top of which we can build other complex user interfaces. And we will be doing a lot of that in the course here. Right now, we are just laying the foundation so that you really understand what is going on under the hood. Now that we have these buttons, we can really do all kinds of crazy things. For example, we can set up a bunch of slots that are going to be activated whenever we click on these buttons. Now you already know how to do these things, but now we are going to be putting in these methods as part of this class. They are going to be methods of this class here. So for example, we can say def button 1, and when it is clicked, we are going to print a message saying button 1 clicked. Okay, we can do something like this. We can even copy this method code. I think we can do that. Okay, so let's do that and do that for button 2 clicked. And we are going to say button 2 clicked. And we can connect signals to these slots that we are setting up here. The way you do that, you come down, say button 1, you already know this. If it is clicked, okay, we want to connect to a signal, to a slot, and that's going to be self button 1 clicked. We have this for button 1. We can duplicate this for button 2. So we can select the line, Shift Alt down. This is going to copy the line in Visual Studio Code. That's why I love Visual Studio Code. And we can put the code here to duplicate it. And we are going to say button 2 clicked. Now we have the connection from these buttons to the slots we have down here. If you click on button 1, you should see this message. If you click on button 2, you should see this message. Let's view terminal. And we are going to try and run again, but we have the previous application instance running. So we can kill it and run again. And if it runs, watch what happens below here. Okay, so let's click on button 1. Button 1 clicked. What is going on here? The problem is that we are setting these methods up as methods of the class, but we're not telling these methods that they belong to this class here. You do that by passing in the self argument. Sorry for that. So let's do self, and I think at this moment this should work. Let's clear and run again. And if we click on button 1, it's going to say button 1 clicked. If we click on button 2, it is going to say button 2 clicked. If you wanted, you could change this to be laid out horizontally by using QH layout. That is going to lay out things horizontally. If you run again, they are going to be laid out horizontally. If you click, button 1 clicked. If you click, button 2 clicked. This is really all I wanted you to see in this lecture. Again, if you don't know what QH layout and QV layout do, I invite you to use the documentation. Let's do that, QV layout. And you are going to have a lot of information about these things. You can really read this if this is your first time. You are going to pick up a lot of information, and this is going to be very helpful in your career as a Qt for Python developer. We are going to stop here in this lecture, and I will see you in the next one.